Hey, welcome to Birthing the Gifts. I am clinical psychologist Dr. Kyla Holmes, and here at Birthing the Gifts, we provide a safe and compassionate space to grow your God-given gifts. In this interview series, we discuss the process of giving birth to your gifts. Today, we have with us Tasha Brown, my cousin. Yes, 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 coming on and to grace us with her presence in her process. And we thank you for coming on to share your experience and your process with us. So, as we were talking about before we recorded, we were kind of talking about really what this conversation series is about. And it
Yeah,
really is really about just that, the idea of people. What does their process look like when they go from even discovering what their gift is to cultivating and nurturing their gift and ultimately birthing or continue to rebirth? Because we're always in this
that's
process
right.
of continually birthing, continually, probably even continually discovering and just growing in whatever gift it is that God has given us. So that's what I want to talk to you about today is that process. And so, Tasha, if you could start out by letting us know, like, when I asked you to interview, let me just say this. It's because of my understanding that I think working in mental health and working
Hmm.
in the social work field is a part of your gift package. So
Yeah.
let me even ask you that, like, is that how you see it as well?
Oh,
That is your gift
absolutely.
package, or what language would you use? I'm saying mental health and social work, but what
Yeah.
language would you use to describe your gift package in that respect?
Yeah. No, I think anytime you're in a helping profession, it's got to be a part of the gift package, right?
Right.
Because it's something that it's going to take a lot of yourself to do. It's never
Right.
going to be about the money. It's never going to be enough money to do the kind of work that we do. As a social worker, it was kind of one of those things that just came up in my life and in my being as just a part of who I was supposed to be, which I know sounds
Mm.
very cliche. It sounds very cliche, but when I discovered or understood what it was to provide a resource and gird people and help and support, social work just became a part of the deal, right?
Right.
So as I was growing up and just it, coming into communication and experiencing different people and understanding where they struggled and understanding what they needed, it just was one of those things where I had to figure it out. I had to figure out how to get them to a place of wholeness. And
Mm.
while it was I later understood that I could not do the whole thing, right? To get them to that place, it was
Mhm.
still a opportunity for me to understand where could I impact that person, that individual, that group, um, those lives in a way that would be beneficial to them. So, I mean, yes, absolutely. Social work has just been a part of the the pieces of who I am in order
Oh,
to
nice.
come to where I am right now. And even with that being said, even that is an evolution, right? Because
Mm.
just understanding what helping people meant,
Yeah.
behavioral health, mental health, it was just a part of the things that they needed.
Mhm. Mhm.
And just understanding how the world impacts people and contributes to their health, their mental health wellness, their physical health wellness, their
Yeah.
socioeconomic status, all of those things are contributors to their wholeness. And so it
Right.
it just was a space for me to understand at what in what areas could I impact that, so that
Mhm.
those people could learn to get to that place of wholeness.
Yeah.
And even just coming to grips with understanding that I had to just help them get to that
Mhm.
place was an evolution for me, because I thought I could just do it. Like I
Yeah.
could do it
Yeah.
for them and they
Yeah.
would just be great. But
Mhm.
no, it was really helping. It was really me getting to a place of understanding that my role was just to help them get to a
Mhm.
place where they could function in a place that was healthy and beneficial for them. So
Yeah. To really empower them to say, but you
exactly,
can walk alongside them and to
exactly.
resource them, equip them, support them, whatever the
That's
thing.
right.
I
That's
love it.
right.
I want to kind of unpack and dig into something you said. You talked about how
Sure.
social work was always a piece of who you are. And I love that because I think when we talk about birth and our gifts, In
Mhm.
some ways, we have to come to that understanding of who am I? What are
Right.
the pieces of who I am? So when do you feel like on any level, even if it was on the most kind of basic a level, you understood that I want to impact the lives of people? Maybe you didn't
Yeah.
have the language of social work or mental health, but you
Right.
knew on some level you want to impact people. When did you discover that?
Oh, it goes back to a really, really old story. And this is gonna sound very much like I've made it up, but it's really
Oh, I
it's
need really
really a very
this.
old story. I was probably 7 years old, and I remember there was a guy that came to my mom's house, and he was desperate. And all I knew, I mean, I didn't understand desperation because at 7 years old, to your point, I didn't have the language skills at that point to pinpoint it, but he was just desperate. And he came to my mom's house, and he was begging for money and food,
Mm,
and he needed something. And this man was literally on his knees begging.
wow.
And that was the first time I had ever seen a grown man in this vulnerable state. And I
Mm,
remember even at that point, I thought, I need to help him. I need to
mm.
figure out how to help him. And I went to my room, and I got my $6 or whatever I had at the
I
time.
love it.
And I brought it to him, and I looked at my mom, and I said, "Can I give this to him?" And
Mhm,
and I remember the look on his face. He was just so relieved to get those $6. And she
mm,
said to me, "If you want to give it to him, if you want to give him your money, it's up to you." And I
mhm,
did, because I thought, to me, it was more important for him to get that little bit of dollars that he needed in order to get to
mhm,
whatever his next thing was, than it was for me to hang on to it. And it was just
mhm,
something about feeling like I needed to do something. Like I
mm,
never was in a space where I saw something happening and I didn't feel like I needed to do something.
mhm,
And so that was really the first instance that I can remember that somebody needed something, and I felt it was my responsibility to
mm,
make it happen for them, to make something
mhm,
work for them. And what's really interesting is I had no idea what social work was when I was growing up.
mhm,
All I heard about social workers is that they took people's children out of the home.
mhm. Yeah, that was the
So
context of social work. Yeah.
that was it. That's it. That's
Mhm,
all I knew, and I did not want any parts of that. So, so
mhm,
I never knew that that's what I was going to end up doing. But I didn't know what it was, and I didn't understand the whole scope. I didn't understand the brevity of just that thinking about what social work was. Um, and I just remember being in college, and I just heard the term social workers, and
and
I
you
don't know
heard
what it
this.
was. It was something that made me go say, let me check and see what this is all about. And when I started really researching and understanding all of the totality of what I could do as a social worker, it just really, it ended up being exactly it was almost like ding, the
Yeah,
light
like it
switch
clicked.
went on.
It
Yes,
clicked.
like
But
that's
Todd, if
it.
I could do that, I want to continue with that part, but I think we're gonna have to rewind a little bit to seven. Let's
Okay.
go back to seven, then we're gonna come back to these
Okay.
college years
Okay.
because I often tell people when I do these interviews with me working with youth and families,
Mhm.
it's always interesting to me when people can trace back
Yes.
a knowing or an understand or something, some type of discovery, some type of connection with their gift. Because I imagine that moment that was that 7-year old kind of connecting with
Right.
that gift or that piece of you on the
Right.
inside. And I like how you said, you had this sense, I need to do something. I wonder
Yes.
if that's how people can know that's a piece of you. If it's something that you feel
Mm.
so deeply and you say, I
Yeah.
need to do something, a
Yes.
sense of responsibility. I don't know. Let's maybe sit with that for a while. Do you think
Yeah.
that's important in people maybe discovering, even at
100%.
that age? Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
No, 100%. I think you have to know that it's a necessity for your life in order to make the decision to continue on that path, because there's a lot of things that can be distracting out here in the world, that I mean that could I remember going into banking, and I was like, I'm gonna just do banking, but it never
Hmm.
was something that I needed.
Hmm.
It was
Hmm.
never something that I needed to do. I never felt any kind of compassion or motivation or anything about it. And so it just was a matter of being able to connect to, I needed to connect to something and
Mm,
needed to be able to say, this is what I'm meant to do. And I do
mm,
think people need to, in order to do this kind of work, to be honest. I mean, yeah, there's
mm,
other work that people can learn how to do. You know, you can learn numbers and, you know, do finance and, you know, do other things, which I'm not knocking it. I think it's great if people, you
mm,
know, that drives folks. But for me,
mm,
it just wasn't something that was something that I wanted to connect to and stay motivated
mm,
about. And even throughout my life, you know, having those instances where I was continuously seeing people hurting and in pain.
mm,
And it wasn't necessarily physically, it was just the seeing the despair in people's faces was tough.
mhm, mhm,
And I just remember thinking, what can I do? What can I do?
mm,
It was always, always a driver to say, what can I do to
mhm,
make an impact in this world in some kind of way? Um, and so I've always sought opportunities to do that. And, you know,
mhm.
again, it just happened to be social work just became a thing for me that I could take all of that energy and put
And
it
put it in
somewhere.
a social,
Yeah.
but you're saying that it was there even from that moment at seven
Oh, yeah.
years old, when you went throughout elementary, middle school, high school, you
Mhm.
still felt that I need to do something. What can I do? Would you say that when people experience despair, and some people call it like bearing
Mm,
witness to people's journey or their
yeah.
pain or their situation. So it seemed like you would bear witness to it. And would you say for you, even as a child, a teenager, you noticed it? Like it's
Oh,
not just
yeah.
something you looked at, like you were like, huh?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Interesting.
no, yeah, no, it was always something that I felt like was in my face. And it's interesting
Mm,
because it probably was in everybody's face, but for
mm,
me, it felt very personal to me.
mm,
And you know, even when I was 13 and my family would go out and we would feed the homeless. It was a part of a ministry that I was with, and we would feed the homeless, and it would be hundreds of people that came to this location at the park to eat. And I remember thinking, number one, where are all these people? Where are they when they're not here? You know, and I,
mm.
because all I could
Interesting.
think about is, where are they coming from? Where are they sleeping at night? That's all I could think about when I saw these people. And I remember seeing a couple, and they had two children, and one was a baby. She was
Mm,
probably a year old. And I remember her diaper was so soiled because they didn't have, you know, additional, you know, materials and things like that to take care of her. And I just remember thinking, somebody help them,
mm,
because this child is out here with no roof over her head, and they were sleeping in their car. And I just
mm,
remember feeling like, and I held on to that baby. I put her on my lap
mm,
with her
mm.
soiled diaper and all. And I was about
Wow.
13 at that time. And I put
Really?
her on my lap, and I will never forget that child. And she left and I never saw her again. But all I could think about is what happened to her, you know,
Mm,
and what their lives were like. So it was always something that, it was, although it was in everybody's face, for me it felt very, very personal. It felt like
mhm,
something I needed to be able to do something. And you know,
mm.
even with that, I as much as I was disgruntled about going out on a 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning,
Yeah, I was wondering about that at 13. I'm like, okay, now how, yeah,
I
like
was
talk about that.
I was
Yeah.
very disgruntled about that.
Okay.
But once I was out there and I was handing people what I felt like was a life raft for the day, it really was
Mhm.
something. It was something to see.
Okay. Wow. 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 That's some, so man, so you have a very, it sounds like vivid, very meaningful memory from seven, and then even those experiences, and then at 13, that you, it
Mhm.
sounds like those defining moments that it's like for you, you reflected. Because I would imagine like even some adults that are there, but certainly
Yeah.
teenagers, I don't know how much they would think beyond the moment, like just what they're
Right.
doing right there. But you were thinking beyond that, like what are they doing outside of this?
Right.
How are they being resourced and getting what they need or
Mhm.
not? Like what is their life like outside of this moment? So it's like
Yeah.
you were really thinking. I do I want to talk about it from this angle too, because there was a couple of things. At 7 and 13 is interesting that you referenced other adults in your life. So at
Yeah.
7, you mentioned like how your mom was in that
Yeah.
moment. And at
Yeah.
13, you said, your family, and then it seemed like a ministry. So maybe it was
Right.
a faith community type family.
Right.
What if, and then so you're a parent now as well. So I wonder if you could
Yeah.
speak to even yourself as a 7 and 13-year-old self, and even also as a parent, what do you
Mhm.
feel like the role of the adults in your life at 7 and 13? Because you were given
Mm.
that opportunity to even be in
Right.
that space at 13 to even notice that,
Right.
right?
Right.
So if you could talk about that, the role of adults at that time.
Yeah, no, I think, oh, that's a really good question. So, I mean, I think at 7, one of the things that my mom did at the time that I think was extremely important is she let me choose.
Mm-hmm.
She let me make a choice. She let me decide that she didn't say, go put that money back up. You're not going to get, she let me choose. And I thought, I mean, thinking back on that, she did the best thing she could have done for me, let me make that decision. Even with letting me make that decision, what she also taught me is with this decision, that does mean that you may be at a deficit if you're making this decision, because now you don't have this money that you were
Mm-hmm.
trying to save
Mm-hmm.
up to buy, your dolls or whatever you're trying to do at the time. Now you don't
Mm-hmm.
have it. So you have to think about, and this was a conversation that we kind of had a little bit after that was, now you have to decide, well, the way she said it to me, it framed it to me, is you can't give all of yourself and all of your resources
Mm-hmm.
away. But she also let me choose. So it was like one of those things where I think it was both important lessons, because although I felt relieved because I had supported somebody, I'd done something positive for somebody, I also felt the impact of not having it. And
Right.
so that it was a lesson that I really would not have understood until much later in life.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, because it was very minor, right? At the time, it was like, now you're
Mm-hmm.
just not gonna get your Happy Meal, you know?
Right, 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 right.
But later on in life, it really took me back to that moment to
Yeah.
think, I can't give all of myself to save
Mm-hmm.
somebody else, because I can't save myself. I can't, if I'm not prepared to take care of myself, I can't save other people. So
Mm-hmm.
so that was important. And I think at 13, I said I was disgruntled. I mean, I was disgruntled. I did not want to get out. I did not want to stand outside of that park at 8 o'clock in the morning. But it was important for them to force me to look out for somebody other than myself,
Mm-hmm.
for me to be in a position where it's not about me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that was an important lesson at 13. It is a lesson that I truly try to teach my kids all the
Mm-hmm.
time,
Mm-hmm.
which
Yeah.
I will say it is a challenge. It is a challenge to teach that lesson. Um, but I started taking my daughter when she was 5 to go volunteer with me when I was volunteering with a program called Project Zero, where they support foster children, and they look to try to organize foster families and foster children so that they can find forever homes. And I started
Mm-hmm.
volunteering with Project Zero when she was about 4 or 5 years old, and I would bring her with me to
Mm-hmm.
those foster care days. I can't even remember what we used to call them back then, but they were those days where we would have foster kids there, and just to teach her and help her to understand that
Mm-hmm.
everybody doesn't have a mama at home.
Mm-hmm.
It was an eye-opening experience for my 5-year-old to get that. Wait, so everybody doesn't have a mama at home? Everybody doesn't have a daddy at home? And so for her, it's made such an impact on her to really be able to understand that.
Yep.
She understands things a whole lot better than I did at that age, because
Mm-hmm.
it's a different generation. I went through
Yeah.
some different things, and so now I think I've been better equipped to really teach her and
Mm-hmm.
bring her along in those things. And so I swear she's
Mm-hmm.
going to be a social worker one day, because she
Oh.
I have
Mm-hmm.
totally just instilled in her the importance of understanding the whole person,
Yeah.
and not just, looking at the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so those things are super important to me. I really look for those opportunities to, um, put them in a scenario where they have to do something for somebody else.
Right.
Even when it's not necessarily a social work situation, but it's
Mm-hmm.
maybe an event or somewhere that they need to be, that they don't want to be, but they're there. I bring them and
Yeah.
I make them,
Mm-hmm.
work and support
Mm-hmm.
and, demonstrate their willingness to, give up of themselves a little bit.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, so it's just something that I continuously look for opportunities to do.
Yeah, yeah, because it sounded like that was instilled into you, like you
Right.
had experiences, or at least you learned that and you gleaned that, and now like you're being very intentional. It's so great to see
Absolutely.
just this type of intentional parenting. I feel like
Sure.
in these generations. So that's great. So it seems like you're doing that. But let me ask this. So sometimes what I notice, you talked about helping professions earlier, and sometimes what I notice or hear people reflect on is, be it nursing, be it mental health social worker, is
Mhm.
like it was always
Teaching.
this sense. What's the teaching? Exactly,
Yep.
exactly. That is this sense of a strong sense of empathy that people always noticed that they had. They noticed pain, they felt pain. So I
Mhm.
guess for you as a young person, as a teen, and going through life, was that ever hard for you? I guess I wanted to like see it, like what was that like for you, and then how you dealt with that or were encouraged to
Oh
deal with it
yeah.
as a young person.
Yeah. I mean, I don't, I will say that that is one of the gap areas of, I think, my life and probably a lot of people's lives in our generation, where,
Yep.
you don't have, we didn't talk about those things when we were coming
Mm-hmm.
up. We were, it was very focused on the person. Like there may be conversations that somebody had with me just about what I was doing, or things that were specific to me, but there was not a lot of conversation about what's happening in the world, and
Mm-hmm.
why somebody is struggling, or why it's crime, or why there's
Mm-hmm.
people with mental health issues that are out there that are not being treated. There was just no discussion about it. Mental health
Mm-hmm.
itself was
Right.
never a topic that I remember ever even hearing when I was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was just the crazy Charles who lived down the street, or
Right.
and it was maybe something like that. But there was never any discussion about,
Mm-hmm.
somebody needed help in this area because they were struggling with their mental health needs. That
Mm-hmm.
was never a thing. I saw a lot of poverty growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I understood poverty in that sense. I got it, but what I didn't understand was the path to poverty. I didn't get that.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't understand. Nobody talked about that piece, and I will say, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but that was one of the things, one of the ventures that I really, really appreciated in my adulthood, is as a early social worker. I got an opportunity to do a homeless survey, a
Mm-hmm.
homeless assessment, and we went out. Some of my classmates and I, and we went out into the community in Little Rock and went to the homeless shelters and interviewed homeless people, individuals. And when I tell you, it
Wow.
was such an eye-opening experience to really get the path to poverty, was really when I
Mm-hmm.
got it. Is when I was able to sit down and talk to those individuals, and they explained to me what happened in their lives. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't just, people have this theory of, they're homeless because they choose to be, or they're homeless because they were
Mm-hmm.
lazy, or they didn't do something correctly. And there were so many situations where none of that was true. It just was
Mm-hmm.
a terrible um experiences that they may have, a series of events that led to
Mm-hmm.
where they were. And it just made me feel very vulnerable to that, because I thought, oh my goodness, that could have been me.
Yeah.
It could have been any of us, in
Mm-hmm.
these scenarios. And it was just a very eye-opening experience. I think I was able to interview some, and it was just vastly different demographics, and they were all men. I got all
Mm-hmm.
the they were, because the homeless shelters in Arkansas or Little Rock have a higher male population, and so I was able to interview, but various young men, older men, middle aged. I mean, it was just a
Wow.
vast array of them, and their stories were so relatable to me, which is
Wow.
honestly the thing that I was most surprised about. is how
Wow.
relatable their stories were.
Yeah. And what type of impact do you feel like that had on your process and your journey to continuing to kind of birth your gifts or discover what that might look like as you move through? What was the meaning
Yeah,
behind
it
it?
helped me understand that there is this sense. Remember, I mentioned wholeness. There is this sense of
Yes.
wholeness that I was missing earlier. There were elements of it that I got. There were
Mhm.
elements of, people needed this or they needed that, but I wasn't looking at the big picture.
Mhm.
And so that really helped me to really get a better idea of looking at the entire person, and
Mhm.
not just the situation. So
Mhm.
that's really moved me into the direction of really expanding the scope of just my thinking and how I interact with people and how I work with people, even as I manage the team that I have.
Mhm.
So I have a team of folks that I'm able to have the privilege of, in my opinion, to support. A lot
Mhm.
of people, I used to kind of have this different perspective, even as a leader, to say, well, I'm leading this team,
Mhm.
until I was able to really look at the scope of all of the the privilege that I had to really support these folks, as opposed to,
Mhm.
to be at the front of it, as opposed to being on
Mhm.
the back end and really
Mhm.
girding these folks. And so it's
Mhm.
really helped me, even in just that, even in being in a
Mhm.
leadership position, knowing really what that means. And
Absolutely.
that was something that I wasn't able to grasp at some point in my life. So
Mhm.
all
I
of it,
like
all
that.
of it's connected.
All of it's, I love it. All of it's connected
All
because
of
it
it's
is. It's
connected.
all connected. So
Yeah.
it sounds like, and I do want to be able to circle back to that is leadership. So it sounds
Yeah.
leadership is a part of your gift package as well. So I'm definitely going to come
Yeah.
back to that. So you went through from young in single digit years, 7 years old, made it to the double digits and kept kind of
Yeah.
moving through. So you went to college and you said you just realized you kind of came across this field of
Hmm.
social work, came
Did.
across it. And so, if you can kind of talk about that and kind of say what, because you said you researched, because I'm always looking for what was the action step. Because sometimes information can be put in front of us that can
Hmm.
help us on our journey and help us
Right.
to kind of further clarify or define what it is that our
Right.
gift is, but we might not act on it necessarily or notice it. But you said something about it, you saw it, and then you researched action.
Yes.
What do you
Yeah.
think kind of motivated that action step,
Oh
so to
my
speak?
goodness. I'm gonna have to go back to say it was it was really one of those faith things. It really, really
Mhm.
was. It's cliche to say that, but it really was something where I was literally sitting at a graduation. And but prior to this moment, I had never heard of there being a social work degree prior to
Mhm.
this moment. And I remember sitting in this graduation, and they said the School of Social Work, they wanted those people to stand up, and it was three people.
Mm.
Three people in this whole school
Wow.
of social work. And it was really something that just resonated with me. Like, it just resonated. And I thought, I wonder what those people do.
Wow.
I mean, it was
Interesting.
really, it was really that simple. I was like, I just really wonder what those people do. And so I went back and I said, let me start Googling social work.
Mhm.
And really, I was one of those people that I always knew I wanted to help. I always knew I wanted to be in psychology of some sort. I just didn't
Mhm.
know what and how. But I knew I
Mhm.
wanted to be in the field. Um, and I was a little intimidated about going into psychology because it just wasn't quite what I wanted. It wasn't
Yeah.
exactly what I thought it was going to be because, you know, understanding my background and my history at that point had just been mental health or behavioral health was just one small component of where my mind was, because in my
Mhm.
mind these people needed help to pay the bills.
Yeah.
These people needed
Yeah.
help
Mhm.
to have somewhere to live. And
Mhm.
so it was the whole scope of the person,
Mhm.
the social
Mhm.
aspect, the socioeconomic status, all of those
Mhm.
things that impacted that person's health and, as well as, their physical health and their mental health. And so I started on the psychology track, and I was just like, but this is not quite
Mm-hmm.
what I'm thinking that I need to, but I was going to stick to
Yeah.
it because honestly, it's the only thing that I knew.
Okay.
And so it was until was at that graduation, and they said it was a school of social work. And I
Oh,
thought, it's a whole school of social work? What does that even mean?
yeah.
And I literally went back that day and started doing some research. And when I
Wow.
realized all of the things that social workers could do, oh my goodness, I was like, this is absolutely what I'm supposed to do. It
Yeah.
was absolutely what I wanted to do. So, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it was really that simple for me.
Yeah, wow. Because you saw that like it fit. So you had all of these experiences growing up where it helped you to know
Hmm.
this is a part of me.
That's
And that
right. Yeah.
I imagine you were getting more clarity about that as you got older, more and more
Right.
advanced ways of understanding that. And then you saw something like this. Now it's packaged nicely in
This
social
is
work. This is
exactly.
it.
Oh my goodness. I
Yeah.
mean, just to see the description and all of the
Mhm.
different, even just the different jobs I could do. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is exactly what I'm supposed to do. That's
Oh
exactly what
man.
I'm supposed to do. So it
Oh,
just really became like I was looking for my other glove, and then that's where it was.
wow.
So it was there. I didn't know what to call it.
Hmm.
So
Okay. And then you
yep,
found that language at that graduation. Wow, that's
exact. That's it.
awesome.
That's it.
That's
That's it.
okay.
And I just
Researched it. That's
happened
it.
to be, yeah,
Mhm.
I just happened to be there. I wasn't even expecting to be at that place, but I just happened to be there that day. And somebody was like, hey, I'm going to this graduation. Do you want to go? And I'm like, sure.
Look at that.
I mean, it was really, and
Wow.
that's how I know God puts you in the right place at the right time. He put you exactly where he needs you to be, to
Hmm.
hear what it is he's wanting to say to you. That's those scenarios always make me know that God is
Hmm.
always still, he's predestined our steps. He's going to put us where he needs us to be.
Wow. So that wasn't a coincidence. You say that was God orchestrating that
That was
moment
God
for you.
orchestrating that whole situation, because
Yeah.
it did not make any natural sense for me to
Hmm.
even be there and for me to even hear that.
Wow.
I mean, because like I said, it was nowhere on my radar. I didn't even know it was a
Hmm.
thing. Had no
Wow.
idea.
No
So
idea. Wow. Yeah. And so he did it, I'm sure, in such a way where he knew you would notice it and pay attention to that
yes,
moment in a way that would then
yes,
prompt you to go research. Because I need
right,
her to go research this.
right. I need you to go
Yes,
see. This is where I'm putting you. This is where I'm putting you.
yes. Okay. So then when you researched it, were you already in college at that time and
I
then
was
kind of
in
changed
college.
your okay.
So I was in college, but I was in so at the time I had just transferred to a new university. And so this again, this is how God works. So so I was at one university, and I ended up having a really bad car accident.
Mm,
And I had to leave that school, that college, and move back home, and ended
mm,
up, transferring schools. And had I stayed at that first college, they didn't have social work, which is why I'd
mm.
never heard about it. It was not
Oh,
until I'd moved back home and started at this ULR at the university, and discovered that social work was a thing. And it wasn't even
mhm.
at UALR's graduation that I heard the term, which is so
Interesting.
strange. So it wasn't even there. And so when I heard that it was a thing at another university, I started
Mhm,
researching it. And then I was like, I wonder where I could find social work
mhm,
at the school that I had transferred to.
mhm.
So here I am. But I wasn't in the program yet. I was just
Okay.
in like my sophomore year,
Mhm,
trying to just get my prereqs out the way. And I was getting ready to go into my junior year. So it was right at the point that I needed to apply to get into the
mm.
social work
Wow.
program. So I'm
Talk about
telling you, it
timing.
oh my goodness, I'm telling you, it was all God's timing, and all of these things were just orchestrated in such a way that it made no natural sense for me to be in these scenarios, and it just happened to be all of these situations. And I had the car accident in December of 2001. I didn't
Mm,
get into the social work program until 2003. So
Okay.
it was a while later before I
Mhm.
even knew it was a thing, and I transferred and all of these things happened. And I was a very angry person because I did not want to transfer schools.
Oh, okay.
I loved where I was. I loved being
Mm,
in college and having the college experience, and to have to move back
mhm,
home and to, be local. I just was not excited about that.
mhm, mhm.
But it ended up being exactly where I needed to be, because otherwise I wouldn't have known. I wouldn't have had the experience that I had. And I went ahead and applied and got into the program, and here we are.
Wow. And then here, wow, look at that. That is quite a
Yeah.
process. And you kind of
Yeah.
alluded to it, but Tasha, if you don't mind, if it was anything else, what would you say from that time in December 2001 or so to
Hmm.
2003? Anything you would say you learned from that about life, about yourself, about how God works?
Oh my
What did
goodness.
you
I mean,
learn?
outside of, like I said, ending up at that random graduation,
Mm-hmm.
that all happened in that space of time. I will tell you that I really had to learn a couple of things. One of the things that I had to learn was patience. Because after that car accident, I was really incapacitated for a while. I was
Mm-hmm.
in a wheelchair for a while and had a walker. Like, mind you, I'm
Oh,
20
wow.
years old with a walker. So
Oh my goodness.
so it was a very slow recovery. Like, it took me a year and a half to finally get to a
Wow.
place where I was done with the surgery, done with the therapies, done with all the hospital visits, done with all of the things. And so it took me a while to get
Yeah.
back to the place that I felt okay enough. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But after the accident, I didn't trust myself. I
Mm-hmm.
literally did not trust my body because,
Mm-hmm.
mind you, I'm, 21 years old, and I couldn't walk across campus without stopping because I was in so much pain, because that was, it was just the effects of the accident. So it
Mm-hmm.
took years for me to get back to a place that I would be able to trust myself. Like, I wouldn't even, it would be small things now that I take for granted now, that at the time it was a
Mm-hmm.
big deal, like wearing high heel shoes, because
Wow.
I couldn't wear them because I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it just wasn't something that my body could let me do anymore for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And it took years for me to get back to a place where I trusted myself. So I not
Mm-hmm.
only had to trust myself mentally to get to because I had to go through a lot of therapy, and just getting to where I had to get through that hard place mentally, but physically,
Mm-hmm.
being able to trust myself again. So that
Wow.
that process was probably one of the hardest in
Yeah.
life. But it taught me a lot of things. One of the things
Mm-hmm.
it taught me is recovery, that
Mm-hmm.
there is an opportunity for recovery, both mentally and physically.
Mm-hmm.
So because I had to live it out, to really
Mm-hmm.
see myself go through it. And
Mm-hmm.
it really put me in a place where I could connect to other people and say, this is something that you could do too. Like, it is something
Mm-hmm.
that recovery is available to all of us. It really, really is. But I had to be there in it, I think, to understand it
Mm-hmm.
and to learn it.
Wow. Wow. That's something. You said some powerful words there. I mean,
Oh
definitely with
man.
recovering.
Yeah.
You talked about trust and trusting yourself and patience. What do you feel like, Tasha, if you learned those very powerful lessons then, how do you feel like that helped? Because sometimes people talk about turning your pain into purpose, or how
Mm,
painful experiences somehow help to continue to shape they're going through. And,
yeah.
and always, at least with the Birth and the Gifts platform, I want to, talk about it through the lens of God not, causing these things.
Mm,
And at the same time, situations can be used and work together for our good,
right.
right? So can you talk about that? You learned that from it, the trusting that you had to learn, the patience, the what you learned about recovery.
Yeah.
You started to kind of talk about this, but if you could connect that to maybe how those lessons continued, or kind of helped with your process going forward as you moved into social work. Like,
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that helped me to connect the dots on all of what I had experienced is,
mm,
um being able to allow myself to go through evolutionary periods in my life, and understanding that we all do. And I don't think that was a lesson I understood many years ago.
Okay.
You have this idea that people are who they are, and that's who they're going to be, and this is what it
Mhm.
is.
Mhm.
And being able to allow myself an opportunity to
Mhm.
learn and grow and develop and evolve helped me
Mhm.
to piece that together when I'm dealing with people in my practice. Um,
Mhm.
this really helped a lot when I was doing direct care, as a therapist, working with individuals and seeing that, number one, everybody has a story. Everybody
Mhm.
has a story. And when you understand the story, you're better able to understand the person.
Mhm.
And putting those pieces together. And it was interesting because one of the biggest things that I would say that I love to do, as a therapist, is helping people piece the things in their lives together. Because
Mm,
if
that's
you're
good.
able to piece it together, then you're usually able to respond to it in a more meaningful way, as opposed to,
Mhm.
I used to say this to my clients all the time: don't let life just happen to you. You
Mhm.
have to take the reins at some point and make
Mhm.
some decisions about what your life is going to be, versus just letting that life just happen to you and you just steadily just going through it and it's just
Mhm. That's
occurring,
good.
as if it's totally out of your control and out of your will. Because a lot of times, especially when people are coming to you in a therapeutic setting, they're usually feeling very defeated. They're usually
Mhm.
feeling, very lost. And usually it's because along the way, they really did. They literally lost their path. They lost their way. They don't understand what it is their life is supposed to look like. They don't understand what meaning they like to have, what impact they like to have on their lives, the lives of the people that's in their sphere of influence. They just don't, they're not able to connect it. And so
Mhm.
like I said, the biggest things for me is helping them to connect it. And if I can
Mhm.
help them to connect it, then I can help them figure out how to get through it.
Mhm.
And
That's good.
they that was probably the highlight of being a therapist, is just getting people to get to that aha moment. When
Mhm.
people are like, oh my goodness, now I know this is why I'm this way, this is why I think this way, this is why my responses to my environment are based on some trauma response that occurred, that was, birthed in me 20 years ago, that I didn't
Mhm.
realize this was going to be the
Mhm.
outcome. I mean, those things were so vital in really getting individuals to a place of wholeness and healing and recovery.
Mhm.
So all of those things, I think I had to experience it to understand it better. Right. I
Mhm.
mean, I know that everybody doesn't have to go through all of those things to get to be good clinicians. So I'm
Mhm.
not at all suggesting that people's lives have to be traumatic in order for
Mhm.
them to be great clinicians. But I
Mhm.
do think, to your point, that people can utilize anything
Mhm.
that they've
Mhm.
experienced, understood, learned,
Mhm.
in order to use it in a meaningful way.
Absolutely, because there's something to be said about that lived experience. Like
Oh
you've
yes.
lived physical pain, emotional
Right.
pain, in that process of recovery, and able
Right.
to connect that with what other people might be experiencing and help them connect their dots. I love it.
That's
And I
right.
love how you bring it back to wholeness because there's something about that. And I know for
Yeah.
birth and the gifts, that's how we kind of think about it that not that it's a place of I don't know, of a destination that now somebody has
Yeah.
achieved a destination of wholeness, and that's the only way for them to birth their gifts. But I do think that's why I wanted to have this conversation series. Like it's a process, but because it is a
Yeah.
process as
It
we
is.
strive towards
It
wholeness in
is.
every area. And as we're doing that, we're continually birthing all of what God has given us. So it is a process. So people will know it's not like I have achieved wholeness. No more, nothing else to work on.
No,
Nothing else. Like,
no.
no, it's a process of working towards
It
that.
is.
Yeah.
And I always, and I got to a place in my life, and this was something that I felt like, it was great for me to get to a place where I understood that there are some areas that I might still be a little immature in.
Hmm.
And, I used to say, I know I need work in this area. I need to mature a little bit. in
Okay.
this area. And it's always been looked at as such a negative connotation. Like, it's, if you're immature, then you're lacking some level of adultness, which,
Mm-hmm.
you know, people make
Yeah.
you feel like it's some deficit in your life. But
Mm-hmm.
really what it is an understanding of, there are some areas I need to make a little bit extra effort in. It's not
Yes.
as natural for me to be
Mm-hmm.
the version of who I would like to be in this particular case, in this
Mm-hmm.
particular scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And so once I was able to come to grips with, I'm going to always be a continuous learner, and
Mm-hmm.
evolution is always going to be necessary in order for me to live this life in a way that's going to be effective. I have to always be willing to learn and grow and mature in some
Yeah.
areas. There are some areas that I will say, yes, I am so much better of a person than I was in this
Yeah.
area 10 years ago. But there are some,
Exactly.
but there are some areas and I'm like, I need a little bit more grace right here.
Yeah.
Because I
Uh-huh.
need to make a little bit more effort.
Yeah, and I think it takes maturity to
Yeah,
notice the
yeah,
places that need more maturity, because that's all we're talking
right,
about, is that we're always maturing and growing, and like how you said, the evolution, we're always evolving. So if that's the case, it's going to be some areas that have less maturity. Like,
right.
right? Like that means we're gonna have to grow in it and develop it further.
That's
Right.
right.
And come, so
That's right.
all of that, like, yeah, it takes maturity, it takes humility to
Oh yeah,
notice that, admit that, and really intentionally work on it.
right.
I think that that's great. So I feel like what we're doing is drawing a parallel between what we do in helping professions, but how we have to do our own inner
We
work
have
as
to do our
well
own
as we
work.
move through.
We
Yep,
have to
you
do our
have to
own
do your
work.
own work. For
Mhm,
sure,
mhm.
for sure. So
And
you move through. Go ahead.
a lot of times people think that if you are a clinician, if you are in the helping profession, you have it. Like your life is solid 100% in
Yeah.
all the areas. And really, that thinking doesn't really make sense, does it? Because that's like if you're a teacher, you teach so you know all the things. That
Mm-hmm.
doesn't make any sense. So there are people that I think need to just really understand that clinicians, we're people too. We are people just like everybody else.
Oh,
We got
so say
our own
say
crap.
that.
Yeah, we got our own mess, just like
Uh,
everybody else. And we may just be a little bit more observant about it, but
mhm.
we have our own
Good point.
pieces of things that we have to work through as well. And we will continue to work through.
Yeah.
The best thing that we have to offer is we have a little bit more understanding about
Mhm.
what it is that's going to be required to get to that next place. Um,
Mhm.
that's really, I think, our biggest, you know, thing that we may have
Mhm.
that would put us, just set us apart a little bit, is
A
that
little bit, yeah. Just some bit of
we
training where we yeah, have
yeah,
some sense of, yeah, maybe an understanding of some
right, we
theories, a
get it,
framework, a
we get it,
skill
we
set,
get it's
but
messed up, right.
yeah, yeah, man, that's something. Well, I want to go back to a couple of things that you said, because you talked about when you start to learn about social work, you notice these are all the things I can do with social work. So
Yeah,
you've been in direct care and you
yeah,
talked about leadership. So
yeah,
I want to kind of talk about leadership for a bit, because you said something and I wanted to come back to it. I felt like one of the things that you were talking about is a term. I was actually just at I want to call it a training or a workshop, and they were talking about this idea of what is our definition of power, right? And she was talking about the
mm,
difference between power over power. I think she was saying power under. She focused more on power over versus power with or within.
yeah,
It was basically like redefining power, and I felt like she
yeah,
was sort of talking about shared power, and how when we think about social situations, and especially to kind of tie this in with leadership, I thought of that when you were talking about kind
mhm,
of maybe the difference between having power over people or
right,
having this hierarchy, like I'm above and they're
yeah,
here. But it seems like you're like, how can we support?
that's
So is
right,
that in your leadership? I guess I'm trying to tie that in with just kind of your whole gift package and your theory
yeah,
of leadership. And
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I think, I mean, for me, good leadership for me is having the capability of being a supportive entity for the people that I am selected. I have the opportunity and the privilege to lead, because really, I've had to really reframe even just an understanding of leadership being a privilege. Because I used to kind of think it was a given. Like you just show up and you have your executive self, and people are just going to follow,
Yeah.
follow
Just
what
fall in line.
they're just gonna fall in line, and they're just gonna and really it's really turned on its head quite a bit as I have grown in leadership. And really it's because I've had good leaders. I will say that I've had great leaders in my career that have helped me to understand what it is that my role is supposed to be. And even with my team, and we have an organizational structure where I have a team of leaders, and they have a team under them. And I think that even when I talk to my team, I ask them all the time, especially on our one-on-ones, when I meet with my team, I ask them all the time, what can I do to support you? What do you need from me that's going to help you be most successful? Because the way that I look at it is, I am not successful as a leader if my team is not successful.
Yeah.
So I'm always looking for opportunities to help support them. What can I do for you? And that's really how I've always tried to frame even my conversations with folks, even if they're not doing very well, to understand what can I do for you to be successful. The other thing is I have had to be very thoughtful about taking the opportunities to show up in a person's personal life and understand that their career, their job is just a portion of who they are. And even as a leader, being responsible for the business, being responsible for my department, being responsible for outputs and strategies and things like that, that's all fine and good. But if that person is not doing well, all of that goes to waste. If I can't support that person, if those people, that entity, those bodies can't show up and feel supported and feel like they are confident in what they're doing, everything else is a wash. So I think that the benefit of being a leader is just having an opportunity to be that supportive body for them, be that supportive entity. And I feel that way in every area of life that I've had the capability of being a leader in, is just being able to be that supportive entity. Even if it causes me to stretch a little bit more, to give up a little bit more of my time, to give up a little bit more of my attention, that's the role that I've signed up to do. So
Okay. All right. Also, it's so interesting that as you're talking about that, it's almost in my mind is like a parallel to even when you went back to 7 years old. Like even though that's a different relationship as it would be
yeah,
with the client that you're working with as
right,
a direct clinical care, but it's still like, what can I do? How can I
right,
support in seeing them as a whole person? Like it's
yeah,
not just about this one relationship, but they're more than this, and you
that's
just
right.
appreciate that. So it's like you still have that way of
It's
approaching
still in
people.
there. It's still in
Yeah, it's
there.
still in there. It's still in there. So you've done direct clinical care. I just want to, before we wrap up, Tasha, like if
Sure.
there's anybody listening that they're interested in social work and they're hearing this
Yeah.
word and understanding. So you've done direct clinical care, you've done leadership, anything else that you have done kind of within the realm of social work or want to do going forward that you think is part of your gift package?
Yeah. So ultimately I want to teach. That is my long-term goal. And the reason why is because as I've been in my career path and doing direct practice and even being in a leadership capacity, what I've learned, and as I'm going through and I'm doing this as the years go on, I'm learning how much support other clinicians need,
Mm,
right?
that's true.
And so I really wish that there were some things that I learned when I was in
Mm-hmm.
school that I don't think, and it's interesting because my colleagues and I've had this conversation several times, like we did not learn and understand so many of these
Mm-hmm.
things when we
Mm-hmm.
were in school. And I think that if I ever have an opportunity to train other social workers, and to teach them or to give them some insight to what this world really looks like.
Mhm.
I would love that. So
Mm.
that would be my future plans. My future goal
Okay.
is to have an opportunity to do that. Now, in what capacity and when that's going to happen,
Mhm.
it's still up in the air. But
That's
that
it.
is ultimately what I would like to have an opportunity to do.
Sure. Okay. I love it. I love it. Well, that's awesome. That's awesome. I fully trust that you will do that because I guess I'm thinking with the process, if God has been into this even before you were 7, but
Oh
you
yeah.
remember that 7, it's like, okay, 7, 13. And I have going to the graduation and this and that. I have a feeling something's just gonna happen in your
It's
process
yep.
where it's gonna
Yep.
become clear. This is the time. This is how. This is what it's
Oh
gonna
yeah.
look like.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That's
I
awesome.
do some teaching on the side as I do what's called pride training for foster and adoptive families. I've been doing that since 2015. So that kind of gives me my little teaching itch because I get to
Oh, yeah.
train foster families and I get to do their home
Yes.
studies and really assess, how they're doing as people.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a very deep dive dig into people's lives. And so it kind of
Wow.
it puts me back in the field of direct care without actually being in direct care.
Yeah. So not quite
But
direct
it
care, but
does
still working with people and still has a
ex
teaching component to it.
exactly, has that teaching component, so it fuels me a little bit from that
Mm-hmm.
perspective, so I do get to do that.
Mm-hmm. Man, that's awesome. Well, I wish you well with all
Thank
of how
you.
you decide to move through, how God leads you to move through. I appreciate you sharing your process with us today,
Of
Tasha.
course.
And yes, and so it's been another edition of Birthing the Gifts. It's a process conversation series. And again, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate
Sure
it.
thing. Thank